chair because it looks like the Dr. Evil chair. And if you did this, it would be perfect.
I'm not planning on replacing it at any time soon, despite Alex's comments. But yeah, but eventually chairs do wear out. So
I think we still want the educators to come into this panel, right? I believe Tony was asking on the back end. I guess JJ can ping me, but I think that we're going to continue to do testing and training in the second hour. So
we're still going to wait till YouTube gets stopped before we bring them in, right?
Yeah, we'll kill YouTube, but then I think we still are still doing the rest of it here.
Copy that.
And if folks are watching here, there is we will cut through those questions very quickly. so we'll have more time for the educators, or you can ask more questions, but this is a good time to ask them. It's a good panel.
Sounds like somebody doing their dishes. Where's that coming from?
Me. Sorry.
Oh, that's all right. Just want to try to figure out.
As my husband's in the back in his office doing stuff, and I just realized my mic was open.
Okie dokie. Since I've been using earbuds, I hear everything.
So they do have models available with footrests.
They also have heat and massage, but I couldn't talk myself into it.
I find those inconvenient because you have to plug in your chair.
Always talk yourself into it. Always.
What I want is a chair with air conditioning, not with heat.
They have fans. They have a cooling, the LMX. They have a dual fan that'll blow on you from inside the chair.
Oh, you're tempting me so much.
A chair that plugs in just sounds like a trip hazard.
I don't know. Electric chairs have been around for quite a while. Oh.
That's a different sort of hazard. I'm more concerned about my vac eating the cord.
I would also recommend the Aero line of chairs from Herman Miller. And I think the Mira brand, Chris uses it, I think. Chris uses it, and some other people have the same chair. So
I have the Mira. Very expensive, best investment.
Excellent testimony right there. I'm willing to go there. And it doesn't have a high back on it because you don't see the back of the chair on Nigel's shot.
Yeah. I ended up with one of the high-end steel case chairs.
30-second warning.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Emily Russo, your host this morning for Office Hours. If you're watching on YouTube, you can find us at officehours.global. This is our long day, so we're going to be here for 4 hours today. The first hour we're going to spend on general discussion about media production. For the second hour, we are going to dive a little bit deeper into topics that we're interested in, and Saturdays is education. So we'll be spending 2 hours talking about education. Now that won't be on YouTube, so you'll have to come into the Zoom to check that out. And if you want to get to that, go to the officehours.global. After that, we go back to YouTube for our lab this week. We have Roger Wagner with the MakerBit TallyLight kit project. And then on Sunday, which is tomorrow, we will have the off-air chat on Office Hours. So if you want to come and ask general questions about media and have a little bit more of a philosophical chat, you can come to that tomorrow. We're going to get into the questions in just a second, but I wanted to remind you that the panel answers the questions that you put into the chat. So if you go to Mukana, you're able to go and put in your questions and also vote on other people's questions, vote them up or vote them down, and we'll answer them in the order that they receive votes. So let's go ahead and get started with our first question.
Thank you, Emily. Tim Mann from Melbourne, Australia asks, what Blackmagic cameras, lenses, would you recommend to replace Canon XA10 and XA40? I would normally be streaming in 1080-30.
John?
So I use a Blackmagic 6K Pro, but I would also say that the Blackmagic 6K would be a good choice. For lenses, I use the Sigma 24-70, and I find that to be a great lens for that camera. It really depends though on your particular distance from the camera and that sort of thing. So keep in mind that the 16 to 35 would also be a good choice.
Alex?
Yeah, it depends on how long you're trying to throw that lens. I mean, I think that you've talked a little bit in the past of needing some larger reach out to get things. And so one of the things you may want to look at is the newer studio cameras. This is the new Blackmagic Studio Cameras Pro. May have, it has Tally, it has it's a 4/3 inch, a micro 4/3 inch chip. And it is, so that'll give you a little bit, it's a little easier to throw those lenses a little bit further. And there's a handful of broadcast lenses that you can control. So that might be one to take a look at. It has both SDI, HDMI, as well as the new Ethernet transport system. So there's a lot of different options as you move forward. And the only thing we'll keep on saying now that we're in March is don't buy anything until the end of April, because we are now in the landing cycle for NAB. So you generally don't want to buy new things 2 months out unless you absolutely have to.
Peter?
I agree with John. Either the 6K Pro or the 6K works. I have a pair of Canon lenses, the 24-70 and the 70-200 lens. The 70-200 is exactly what Alex talked about, just so I could throw it out and go, stand 50 feet away from the speaker and still get a proper headshot out of it if I need to.
All right, next question. Oh, we can't hear you, Mitchell.
Next question from Tim Mann from Melbourne, Australia. For long-distance HDMI 30 to 50 meters, HDMI from cameras to A10 Mini Pro ISO, what's the more reliable method, HDMI over fiber or convert to and from SDI? Which method will also enable Blackmagic camera control?
Mitchell.
Well, you don't want to run an HDMI cable that long. It's very unusual to have one that's over like 20 feet maybe maximum before you start getting problems. What you want to do is go SDI, which you suggest, and Blackmagic happens to make a bunch of converters that will take you from HDMI to SDI. Just make sure you get the one that's bidirectional so that you have that camera control going on.
Alex?
Yes, the bidirectional HDMI to SDI converter is what you need, and you absolutely, at that distance, you're near the maximum distance that we would use SDI, but that is still the way to do it. The only thing you may do there is to decide to go to fiber, but I don't know. We haven't tried to do camera control. It should work. What you probably have to do is do HDMI to SDI and then to fiber, and then back to SDI and then HDMI. That's how we probably do it. I don't think that there is a Blackmagic HDMI to SDI, HDMI to fiber direct conversion that would get you there.
All right, next question.
And it comes to us from Todd Worley of Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Can you recommend an app program that can be used to evaluate our internet connection? Looking for something to help us troubleshoot streaming issues. I think we've ruled out hardware and software as being the problem.
Alex?
I mean, the most basic thing that a lot of us will do when we're trying to figure out what's going on is use a trace route in terminal. So we just want to trace route to an IP that's known. And then what we get to see is all the hops, because usually when you're having an issue, and it'll tell you, latency in those hops. And I think that is usually the way to think about, that's the first line of defense of figuring out why are things randomly moving too slowly.
Jeffrey?
And the best thing to do is to take everything off the network except that one computer straight into the into where you're getting your internet from. Run that trace route so you know that base is your starting point and that is working perfectly. And then start adding things and then continue to do that to see if that makes any changes.
Alex?
And you'd be surprised. You may think that there's just a switch there and it's probably going out to the internet, but we've had ones where there's 100 hops before it reaches the outside of the building. So that's going to add a lot of latency, reduce stability. So you really need to know what that is before that works. The other things that we'll use are like the Fluke makes some pretty good, what is it, link route or link runner, that these are little smaller hardware devices that you can plug in and get a lot more data. You'll get not only the hops, but all the equipment. And so you can get a lot of data from these link runners, I believe is what they're called. And most of us have those in our bag to check it out. Just don't use it in a facility that might be considered secure, or people will come talk to you super fast. Not that that's ever happened to me. They're usually very nice about it. They're like, hey, what you doing? How's it going? I'm like, well, just checking our internet connection. Yeah, let's not do that. So anyway, all right.
Let's not say we did. All right, next question.
And it's from Tim Mann of Melbourne, Australia. How do I back up the Resolve project library on Mac OS? I need to rebuild my machine, but would like to retain the current projects. All the content is on external SSDs and was recorded on a Mini Pro ISO.
Alex?
This is the big argument for keeping all of your project files off your core hard drive. So there is an event folder there that you can just simply move for Resolve, and it should move everything with it. But this is why when they gives and asks you what hard drive you want to put your Final Cut projects, your Logic projects, your Resolve projects, have an external drive that does this, so that when you need to do this process, you just simply do whatever you need to do. So you try to keep as few core pieces. If you can refer to an external drive, that's what you want to do most of the time if you're doing production.
All right, next question.
I think Peter's still.
Oh, I'm sorry, Peter. I'm sorry, Peter.
I was about to violently agree with Alex, but it's one of the reasons I have a collection of Samsung T5 drives on my desk, just because all the project stuff goes onto those, not onto the main computer. As a matter of fact, these days with the main computer, you're kind of foolish not to get away with just the minimum amount of storage, onboard storage as you can, and just use external storage as much as possible.
Yeah, I agree. All right, next question.
Douglas Carmichael wants to know, if you were building a touring setup for traveling with a wheelchair user in a customized RV, what would you use for connectivity? Would a Peplink 5G router work, or would you go for a mobile Starlink?
Alex?
Both. Like that's the what you want to do is have some cellular connections as well as the Starlink connection. I don't know whether they're converting what we already have for Starlink as mobile, like they're just unleashing them, or whether you have to get a different one. If they've converted it, I'm pretty excited because I have one. But I would put the Starlink in as an added. With a Peplink, you can bond a bunch of different connections. You will need either into their cloud or into another hardware appliance on somewhere that has internet. But you can take 4 or 5 connections, depending on the Peplink. But you can, the ones that we use, you can take 4 or 5 connections. And so I would just make the Starlink one of those connections, along with other cellular connections, and that should beef up what you're doing pretty effectively.
Mitchell?
I
believe HughesLink has a mobile device. At least I see them at marinas where they're on top of the boats going.
And I didn't raise my hand, but I would highly recommend not using the HughesLink because the height of their satellites is way further out than the Starlink. And while they are, the latency is very high compared to the Starlink.
Mark?
Can you use a Starlink mobily? Because aren't you limited to where it's based?
It's capable of mobile. It's capable of high velocity. So it's just that it's not. The problem mostly is demand on the downlinks. On the ground stations, and so they don't want to have you moving too much where they can't control that. But they've always talked about moving it to a mobile configuration once they get up to speed.
Nigel?
There's some consideration about where you're going to park your RV if you're going to use 5G. So having had an RV and been around and touring, the parks are often in a place with fairly poor 5G or fairly poor coverage, or coverage by one provider or the other. So I know a lot of people have both an AT&T and a Verizon connection. And while the parks often have Wi-Fi, it's very low grade. They don't want you to stream, and when you're parking there as a short-term resident, you can be a long way from any aerial. So be careful of that too.
And Alex?
And Nigel, do you think that would be a good value added to be able to advertise for a campsite, saying we've got lots of bandwidth? I feel like if there was a lot of advertising around that, I could see myself going to those, like picking those specifically if I was traveling, because I would know that I could get good bandwidth.
And it really depends where you are. If you're in like an KOA, you'll probably find the KOAs, the better KOAs, are very sensitive to that, and they have better bandwidth and you get good placement. However, if you're in Uncle Johnny's campsite, they view this as an unnecessary expense, which they can't get any money for.
Right.
Which is interesting, because there's a lot of people who are about that van life in the newer, younger generation. Like, I follow a bunch of TikTokers and Instagram people who are literally working from home or remote, but are driving across the country trying to find those places, I guess. So it should be interesting coming up. All right, next question.
Andy Kokendorfer from Viera, Florida. Switcher advice needed. Our panel discussions frequently range from 5 to 10 panelists, which need to be seen on screen at once. A10 Mini Super Source maxes out at 4, so I now use Wirecast with Zoom ISO. Is there a better hardware switcher solution?
Jeffrey?
For hardware, yeah, absolutely. Wirecast works very well. So, and of course, vMix also will work really well with doing that. But you'll have to marry a couple different computers to make that happen. But yeah, if you're looking for a hardware solution, the ATEMs, I always consider the ATEM the consumer version of a pro model, and there's ATEM switchers out there that will do super sources like that. The ATEM ME1, ME2s. Will have that have some of those functionalities that you'll need to go from there.
And Alex?
Yeah, the ME1 doesn't actually have a super source, unlike the Extreme. The ME2 has one super source. You don't get to two super sources until you get to the Constellation. So the Constellation, we do that now, and so we can get up to 8 with 2 using both super sources in tandem. But that's a $10,000 piece of hardware. So I probably would lean towards, if I wasn't going to spend $10,000 on a Constellation, I would probably lean towards the vMix. But I do think that the Constellation is more stable. And so I will say that we have a couple we're using. That's what this show runs on, as a Constellation, and we have 2 of them in 090, and mixed with Mix Effect Pro, they're pretty amazing.
All right, next question.
I have a question. Many of us use our A10 Mini as a source for Zoom. In order to maintain video sync, I run my mic through my Sony camera, which provides synchronous audio. What other ways do you use audio to avoid gain stage noise and bypass the ATEM audio?
Kenneth?
Well, with the understanding that every bit of amplification also brings in a bit of noise, you want as much gain as you can manage with as little noise as possible. Signal to noise ratio matters a great deal. Without getting too deep into this, I would suggest that you set what controls you have at 0, because that's a good place to start. Set the first possible adjustment as high as humanly possible without entering into distortion. And if that gives you too loud of a resultant signal at the other end, take the last possible control and turn that signal and the noise that's been generated on all other chains, all other stages of the chain down. So adjust the first stage for maximum possible signal and adjust the last stage for minimum possible noise.
John Pewitt.
So like many of the panelists, I use a MixPre 3, and that allows me to use noise assist to reduce background noises and other noises that are coming into the chain. And so it feeds directly from a microphone through the MixPre 3 into Zoom through my Mac. And then I also use a delay in the MixPre 3 of about 150 milliseconds to match my voice to my video. So that's how I handle the issue. Noise Assist is an excellent $300, I believe it is, add-on that helps with a lot of background noises and other room noises, which may be exacerbated by upping the gain. And it also helps with the delay, and it avoids the ATEM Mini.
Nigel?
Yeah, I was about to say that I do something very similar to John. So my Blackmagic feeds my ATEM Extreme. My MixPre 3 is for my sound with Noise Assist, and they meet at Zoom. But I haven't put the delay in. So I don't know whether that's my inexperience not being able to see that I'm out of sync, or whether it's so marginal and Zoom is, and networking is so messy, it gets lost at that level. So I'm looking forward to when we can get to the point where we get a piece of software or something that Alex has been talking about where we can judge that.
Mitchell?
I'm a little different. I run my microphone into my Sony FX3, but here's the difference. If you use analog inputs on your any camera, they usually have inferior preamps. I'm talking about the 3.5 millimeter input, and they're all noisy, including the one on my FX3. So if you use a audio shoe, which plugs into the M1 connector on the top of it, it has a digital converter in it. So you're going to digital really fast. You're not dealing with the preamp built into the camera. It's being done in the digital domain, so therefore the noise goes away. So I guess the general rule of thumb, at least in my case, is the quicker to digital, the less chance you have of making noise.
Alex?
I mean, the real challenge there is that the still converting from analog to that, there's a preamp right there that's got to take that analog signal and read it, and measure it, and then turn it into digital. And so the issue is that you want that to be a high end preamp. So the first thing that your mic plugs into should be and the best preamps the best preamps out there as far as that first connection are really on the sound devices, hardware. So, as far as small and portable, I mean, there's big mixers with other things, and there's dedicated preamps for thousands of dollars. But I will say that the sound devices ones are some of the quietest ones that we've seen so far. So, so it still has to, even though it's everything's converting into digital, but you still have to. There's still a preamp there to get the mic from the mic to into the system.
Mitchell?
Alex is right. I neglected to say that. Sorry, this isn't a rebuttal. It's just a clarification. I go into an AFX channel first, so if the preamp is in the AFX, and then the line output goes into the camera. So there's no extra preamp, but it does do a conversion from analog. That's for sure.
All right, next question.
Jacob Goodnight from Indianapolis, Indiana, wants to know, I guess he's talking about me, where did you get those LED VU meters behind you? What signal is feeding them? Well, if I roll back a little bit, you can see them better. Oh, I'm sorry, Emily. I jumped in there. The meters are Duro LEDs. They're kind of pricey, but they do the trick. They're kind of large. They're about this size. And Duro also makes a super big one you could put on a stage in a theater. As far as what's causing them to bounce up and down, I have a music player that sends music all around my house, and that's what's powering it. So you see them moving to the music on the player, and it just adds a little interest in the background. And when I stop talking, I'm going to zoom back and so you can get a better look at it.
Nicely done. All right, Alex?
Yeah, the Duros are just classic. They've been around forever, for as long as I can remember looking at them, and they're just beautiful meters. So if you want something very classic, he's got a great piece of hardware back there.
All right, next question.
And it's from Douglas Carmichael. How have you dealt with trucking issues in production? Do you prioritize staff with CDLs or local equivalent for events that require trucking support?
Alex?
So we've done a lot of trucking. For a long time, we just owned our own trucks. So we had, I had in my previous company, I had 2 transit vans that were extended both vertically and one of them had a lift gate on the back, and then we had a box truck, an 18-foot box truck that would move those. Anything bigger than that, I will say that once you start moving to having your own vans and trucks, it changes the way you build products. So instead of you move from, I started with basically catering trays to get from our office to Moscone because we were only a couple blocks away, and then I thought that I had grown up because we had started to use Pelican cases, and then you suddenly realize that the Pelican cases are great, but then you move to road cases. And so, and you start stacking them, and you start getting really, really good at cinching those road cases into each track along the sides of the trucks. And you do it in layers. And so we got to a point where about probably 80-90% of what we did was our own trucks. If it got larger, you end up buying into a piece of a larger truck if it needs to get somewhere. And then a lot of our shipping overseas we used a company called Rocket. Rocket is not the least expensive, but the most precise. So they'll handle all the carnets and all the other things, and just get a pile of a pallet worth of stuff from one part of the world to the other extremely effectively.
That's good to know. All right, next question.
Chris Taylor from Carlsbad, California. Alex, yesterday I asked a question about the teal color in your telestrator. I understand the entire flow except when you select color 1. Where is actual color teal coming from? I only get the color white.
Let's see here. I assume I didn't raise my hand. Sorry.
That's it.
There we go. We need to do that for the technical end of things. So here is the, so I'm going to actually circle something so you can see that green there. And what I'm going to do here, let's see if I can get my mouse into the right here. So there's color 1, and here's the color. And if I change that color, you can see it change here. So that's how you change the color. That color 1 is set as your fill color. So here's the color here. So you have color 1 here is your fill. The key source is the camera 8. And that's my computer that's doing the key. And then I'm simply just changing the color here to get the color that I want. So that's exactly how you do that.
Well done. All right, next question.
And questions from Mark Giuliani in Washington, D.C. I have a HyperDeck Studio 4K going into my A10 Mini Extreme. I have video working in Zoom, but I have to switch audio and Zoom from my MixPre 3 to the Blackmagic Design if I want Zoom attendees to hear the video. Is there a better way?
Peter, is there a better way?
I don't know if it's better. I mean, let's be honest about it. But I mean, it goes back to the other question. The first thing I did is for shows where I'm doing things like that, is I have my audio actually routing from my MixPre 3M through a very short cable into my A10 Mini Pre Extreme ISO. And then everything is going into that, and I set audio follows video, and it just works at that point.
Mitchell?
I concur with Peter. I think that's the way to do it. If you're going to be switching audio, if you run it into your A10 Mini Extreme or whatever you're using, you'll be able to switch the audio that's concurrent with or synchronous with the HDMI. So that's probably the better way to do it. You might give up a little bit of noise floor.
John Preto.
I had bought the new HyperDeck Studio Pro, and they took all the XLR connectors off the back, and so I had to buy the breakout box to get SDI to XLR and then feed that back into my mixer, which then feeds into my PC to do exactly that.
Mark?
Okay, so that's what I was going to ask. Can I come out of the headphones on the HyperDeck and go into the MixPre 3? Just get a 1/4 inch to an XLR, or is that going to make a whole bunch of background noise?
Anyone want to jump in and answer that?
It's going to be noisy. It's not a great sounding quality, but I use it for monitoring. It's okay for that, but it's hissy and noisy.
Yeah, that's why I gave up and just let it route the audio from the Blackmagic Design into the You go through the HDMI cable into the switcher, and again, by switching the audio through the switcher to the ATEM switcher for my mix per 3M, I just audio follows video, and it just works.
John Pewitt?
I have a slightly different solution. It's not quite as sophisticated as the other panelists, but I use Audio Hijack Pro and Loopback to reroute the audio. And so I can put both sources in at the same time, and then I don't have to worry about switching the audio. It's just an alternative. It's probably not as good as what they're recommending, but it works for me and my use cases.
All right, interesting. Next question.
And it's from Mark McFarlane from Boston, USA. Any recommendations for a MagSafe stand to keep your iPhone handy during work? Bonus if it has an AirPod charge feature.
John Pewitt?
I'm raising my hand only because it's not really MagSafe, but it does work really well for charging a MagSafe phone. And this is a key charger that I got. I think it was recommended on MacBreak Weekly. I like it because it's got a little stand so that I can rest my phone on it. The only thing I have to watch out for is the case on the back has a ledge right here. So you got to be careful not to hook the lip there and make sure that it rests, and it charges the phone just fine. And while it's not MagSafe, it is MagSafe compatible. I'm using a MagSafe case with no problem. I have used it to charge the AirPods Pro, but you need a little bit of a riser to get it right to the charging pad.
All right, next question.
Kenneth Jones in Seattle, Washington, USA. Does SDI cables come in different diameters? Does it matter? Why?
Alex?
They absolutely come in different diameters. And so a lot of times it depends on how long you're going to run that SDI. I mean, there's a lot of calculations to it, but the SDI that you're going to run very long runs, some SDI can run 800, 900 feet, but these are much heavier gauge SDI and oftentimes not very flexible, but they're great for installation. But that larger gauge, of course, reduces resistance and allows the signal to run a longer distance. A lot of us use very thin cables, and I can't remember what ours are right now off the top of my head, but we just ordered some, and I was trying to find the order. But usually I think it's 23 gauge or 24 gauge. It might be 22. These are much smaller gauge wires, and the reason we choose the shorter ones is because they'll still carry 4K up to 75 feet without any trouble, but they're much lighter. So if you're filling a case full of them, so if you have like 100 connections in there, the gauge of that wire can change the weight of the case by 20 or 30 pounds, like of wire. And it's also a lot easier to deal with when you're moving everything around. So we use much finer gauge for most of our studio builds and for our racks and everything else. And then if we have to run long distances, we often start to move to the heavier gauge wire and then to fiber.
All right, next question.
From Grant Cardwell in Belfast, Northern Ireland. External SSDs are becoming ever more popular. Is it fair to always pick the newest version, or is it more complex, e.g. is a T7 better than T5? Thanks.
John Pewitt.
It depends. I think that's our favorite answer. Generally speaking, with the T5 versus the T7 doesn't really work with the Blackmagic cameras. And I don't believe it works with the Blackmagic switcher, but the T5 does. So I tend to buy more T5s than T7s because it's more compatible with my equipment. So be careful to check the manufacturer's recommendation on what devices are compatible, especially if you're doing high-speed things like video recording, and that will guide your decision.
Mitchell.
Yeah, that's an easy mistake to make, is to assume that the latest version is better than the previous version. But in the case of the T5, T7 debate, the T7 uses a different technology. I think Alex has said it before on the panel, than the T5. And the T5 just works. It just works and works and works.
Peter?
I don't know how, I guess I'll agree with everyone. And the fundamental answer is they use a different buffering technology inside the T7. But to reiterate what John said, always go with the manufacturer's recommended list under these cases, because I did personally buy a T7, fell into that trap, and it would stop 30 minutes into what I was trying to shoot and not allow me to record anymore. And that just, well, let's say I didn't have many family friendly things to say about it at the time.
Mark?
I've been using the SanDisk, and I haven't recorded for anything more than 10 or 20 minutes, but they seem to work pretty well.
All right, next question.
And it comes to us from Hasmuk in South Africa. Luma or the Chroma? Can we cover, maybe again, the difference between the two and when to use one or the other?
Alex?
Yeah, so the main thing is that and I don't have a great example in front of me, but I'll just try to describe it. The Luma is, of course, taking the Luma information, so that's the black and white information from an image, to do the key. I'm assuming because of your next question, which I'm kind of answering now. I guess it's not. It's separate. Anyway, so Luma and Chroma. Chroma is going to use the color information. So I will almost always use Luma. I will almost never use Chroma as a keyer. And the reason is that the video pipeline that's going through your switcher is a 4-2-2 video pipeline. This is the Luma. This is the Chroma. And it means that for the U and the V, you basically have 1/2 of the resolution that you have in the Luma. Where you see this is if you have a graphic with a curved edge like this, you'll start to see stair-stepping along here if you're using Chroma, because you're only keying half of the resolution, and so you'll see stair-stepping along curves. So I usually use Luma. Now the best thing to do, of course, is if you're using a downstream key and you have the ability to do pre-multiplied, if you're going to bring a graphic in. Pre-multiplied is like an alpha channel that's built for that. But if you're pulling that alpha channel and you have to, if you're creating it on the fly inside the switcher, I will almost always use a Luma unless I have a lot of black. And even then, even if I have a lot of black in my logo, what I tend to do is, basically what you want to think about your graphic like this. It's, it's like let's just say this is your graphic in the Luma. So this is pure black and this is your graphic that's here. And some of it may be really close to the black. What I will do, just think of this as like a waveform. What happens is you're just when you're clipping, you're just deciding what are you going to clip off all the way across, and then what are you still going to show. What I will do is just raise the black levels in Photoshop or Affinity Photo, or even if Keynote, raise these black levels so that what I'm trying to key is still over it, but the small blacks that I might have in here are preserved. And the funny thing is, especially if you're going into Zoom, no one's going to see it. So Zoom is going to add contrast back to it, and so they're not going to see that black that you raised up 3% or 6% to get it off the ground. So I think that I will almost always recommend. The only time that becomes hard is a motion blur, but that's not going to work very well. You want pre-multiplied if you're doing some kind of blur.
Nigel?
Yeah, sorry, Alex. Can you explain the pre-multiplied again? I was with you and then I got derailed.
Yeah, so pre-multiplied is a pre-multiplied image means that I have I'm coming in with an alpha channel. So that means you saved out of your product, whether it's After Effects or whether it's Photoshop or whatever. I have it comes actually with 2 images, right? And one image is your fill, and that is going to be the color that you're putting in. And the other is your key, and that's the black and white information that is designed to move with that fill, or be with that fill that's there. So that's why we call it key fill, and that it's referred to in Photoshop as your alpha channel. So now a pre-multiplied image means that you've basically you take your alpha channel before you export it out, and you multiply it to your fill. Now, the reason you do that is, when we say multiply, I literally mean multiply. It means that each pixel sitting over top of itself the pixels that are black are 0. Whoops. If the pixels, as they're doing the math, the black pixels are 0. When you multiply 0 to any value underneath it, it becomes 0 or black. So you pre-multiply, and then if it's something less than 0, then it will be, if it's white, it's 1. So it leaves that alone. If it's black, it's black. And if it's some gradient, it does it. Now, the reason you have to pre-multiply those images in the ATEM is because the ATEM takes the alpha channel that comes in with it, the key, and it multiplies it to the background layer. That's your video, that's you or whatever. It multiplies that again, and it does exactly the same thing. Well, basically, you invert it and it multiplies, and that basically knocks a hole out for your fill. So that alpha channel punches a hole through it, and then you take your fill and you add it. And when I say add, literally you add the 2 pixel values together to get that, and then you get a composite, for that process. And so the main thing is that the reason you need to pre-multiply it is because if you had what we call a straight alpha that wasn't pre-multiplied, you would knock a hole out of your foreground, the new fill that you're building. You would knock a hole out of that and then add them together, and it's a cleaner version, but it takes an extra process for the ATEM to do anyway. So when you say pre-multiplied here, it goes, it means that I know that everything I shouldn't show is black. So it says, I know that that's all black, and I have an alpha channel, and I'm just going to punch the alpha channel out of the background and add this over top. And that's going to be the way that works. Hopefully that makes sense. It's really always hard to describe it without pictures. I just didn't have any pictures with me, but it's but pre-multiplied is you're exporting something out with an alpha channel that has a pre-multiplied RGB channel that's going to come in, and you can build that in Photoshop or again Affinity Photo. We'll talk about that again in more detail. That was a clumsy answer. I apologize.
It's a Saturday answer.
Yeah. So I got to think about that one. I just got to build some demos. It's just hard to do it without images that you can see. So I'll work on that.
All right. Next question.
Hasmut continues from the previous question. He wants to know, related to Luma and Chroma in the ATEM, when do we use the upstream key and when to use the downstream key?
Alex.
Most of the time I use the downstream key when I can. What an upstream key does is it means that it's going to go into the channel, and it's basically being burned into the video channel. And where that becomes important is when you want a clean feed. So what we have, we tend to call program feeds or dirty feeds and clean feeds. The goal that you always have with your video is to have one output that is a clean feed. And that means that it doesn't have your lower thirds, your sweepers, anything else that's sitting on top. So those are all the graphics. And so the downstream key is downstream from the main video feed. And what that means is that because it's being run as a separate channel all the way through, you have downstream 1, downstream 2, sometimes more downstream keys, up to 8 in some switchers or more. That downstream key is sitting on another layer that's being composited, or they're sitting on multiple layers that are being composited right at the very end for program. But it means because they're being composited at the very end of the chain, it means that you can have an output in the switcher that says, I'm gonna do that, or an output in and then the program or dirty output has all the composite in here. I have a cat that's doing something crazy, so I might have to leave here in a second. I can hear some banging going on out there. So anyway, I tried to kick it out. It wants back in. Anyway, so that's the upstream key pushes that into the video. It's part of the video feed. There's no way to get a clean feed. If you put an upstream key in, and sometimes you need to do that because it's all part of the process and you don't have any more downstream keys, because every downstream key requires another signal bus. And so you have to, because it's sitting there compositing, and so you can't do that all the time, or the thing would need too much power. It wouldn't make any sense. So upstream keys then burn that stuff into it permanently.
All right, Mitchell.
Yeah, I would add that the naming is a little weird. Downstream is closer to the final output that goes down, and upstream is before you put the video into the system. So it's just weird nomenclature.
It's actually perfectly precise because it's downstream from the whole video chain. so anyway.
But now you know. So, yeah. All right, next question.
And this is Mitch Hill downstream. Josh Kaufman from Pittsburgh, PA asked the question, vMix is an increasingly popular choice for software-based switching workflows, particularly in the cloud. Would it be a good idea to schedule a lab and perhaps a second hour suggestions submitted in Discord?
Alex.
Yeah, I'd love to do a second hour. I just need to have, with those kinds of things, people just need to propose who's going to be the host. Like, who's going to be the guest? Is it going to be someone from vMix, or there are people, in the past, we've had people in the group say, hey, I'm interested in talking about this. I would love to do a second hour in vMix. I just don't know enough about it myself to guarantee it. So I would just need someone to give me a proposal of these are the 2 or 3 or 4 people. We have plenty of people in our group that know how to use vMix, and I'd love to do a second hour on it. I just need to know who those are and what day they can show up.
All right, next question.
And it's Hasmukh from South Africa, bringing in graphics into a production. I have Keynote, QLab, H2R graphics, and I'm aware of SPX. Do we need all of these and be master of none? Alex will say master Keynote. Is that what it comes down to?
Alex.
Yeah, I think that for bringing graphics in, I think that they all have their own use. Keynote is obviously the easiest one, and that's what I got started with. We couldn't do what we're doing with our show with Keynote. SPX is what we're using, and we're really happy with it. And it's a very cost-effective, highly flexible, especially if you have some folks that can build the CSS that's required to make it really work. So I think SPX is great. H2R is great because it's kind of automatic. You have less flexibility, but it's easier to kind of just turn things on and make it work. I think John Barker's done a great job of that. And so I think those are there. QLab, I wouldn't necessarily use QLab in my workflow as part of a graphics engine, though you can. It's just a little complex, to do that. But it has an enormous amount of power in QLab, and so if you're willing to dig into that, it is going to produce some pretty great results. As far as that goes. So it just depends on how deep you want to go. QLab was going to be the deep, QLab or SPX are going to be the deepest ones that you have there.
Peter?
Just to add confusion to I know Hasmukh has been using Max in the past. I assume he still is. I do a lot of my graphics inside Mimo Live, actually. That will generate simple graphic or actually reasonably complex graphics if you know what you're doing. And again, maybe there's some programming that has to go into it, but usually not. The fairly versatile layer technology allows you to stuff graphics in fairly quickly.
Mitchell?
I would say take a look, especially if it's for broadcast or live, look at NewBlue, newblue.com. I think they're up on the internet. They have a lot of pre-built things. You can build them in advance, and then you can fire them off. It seems to have a workflow that works well for live situations.
All right, next question.
Next question comes from Craig McFarlane in Boston. I'm planning a personal teleprompter, 10 to 16 inches. Is cost the only trade-off between using a monitor versus an older iPad?
Nigel.
So I think the first question you have to ask is, what are you trying to do with this thing? Because if what you're trying to do is read a script, then I think an iPad works well. You can buy software that flips it over. When I built mine, I thought I was being really clever. So I bought a fairly cheap piece of glass from, Amazon, because I wasn't going to spend a lot of money on it. I bought a fairly cheap little monitor, which I was going to leave on all day, because mostly what I'm looking at is the panel or my Teams. And then I discovered I couldn't flip the picture in my monitor. So I then bought a decimator, which cost more than the cheap piece of glass and the monitor I bought together. So I'd say be really careful about what you're trying to do and what your main use case scenarios are. And we can all go to monitor people and all the high-end teleprompters. When you do it cheap, you're going to find there's all sorts of compromises based on your main use case.
Jeffrey?
Well, I've also built teleprompters for doing what I do, but that's not, if you're going to do it in a professional basis, you definitely don't want to do what I did, which was basically a box and a monitor. But when it comes to, if you're buying an inexpensive teleprompter, a lot of those inexpensive teleprompters are meant for the iPad, which is up to maybe 10 or maybe even 12.9 inches. Whereas you get a monitor that's going to be a different resolution, different screen size right there. I've been using portable monitors, and I bought a little VESA mount attachment, which I've then attached to the bottom of the teleprompter to use it from there. So the sides don't show up on the teleprompter itself, but with the flipping of the screen, I can do reading off the screen or looking at Emily's face or anything like that.
Alex?
Yeah. So the I find that the iPad is a little finicky. So we've built ones with iPads, and you can mirror your desktop to them, and people definitely make them work. I like to have the monitors because I like to be able to just route whatever I want there without thinking about it. And it might be the thing with the iPad is it's connected to your Mac, typically to use it as a second monitor with a variety of different tools. I like to be able to say, well, I just want to send my camera there. I want to send my Mac there. I want to route whatever I want to route to that monitor. And that's a different workflow to make that happen.
Mitchell?
Yeah, I kind of figure that if you just want to be an interrogator and make eye contact, I'm just going to suggest that you look at this device from ICANN. It's just a small teleprompter that clips on the front of your camera. It's called a home stream. If you're going to be reading copy and text, this isn't the solution for you.
Alex?
And the way we're using this, is we just give credit to Errol Morris, is what's referred to as the Interrotron, is what we like to use, and that's the Interrotron process. I don't think he invented it, but he did name it.
All right, next question.
And it's from David Brady in New York City. Took a dive into Keynote with lots of moving parts. Are there shortcuts to constrain asset positions between slides? Also, with multiple elements, is it better to build with multiple slides or single slide with layers?
Alex?
With multiple elements, I'll definitely use, I generally will use the single slide and add the layers. So any single idea generally will have a slide that has all the pieces to it, because then you're going to be able to animate those. You're going to use the build order to figure out how they're all going to integrate. As far as constraining, remember that if you cut and paste in Keynote, it will cut and paste to the next slide in exactly the same position. So a lot of times I kind of rectify things. If I decided to move something, I can recut it. The other thing I do is if I'm going to use Magic Move, which I use pretty often, I'm going to copy the slide. So build the slide if I have another element that I want it to stay exactly where it is, I just simply duplicate the slide and then build the other things around it, as opposed to trying to figure out how to get it, because Magic Move is very sensitive to cut and paste because it's using IDs to know what to go from to.
Yeah. All right. Next question.
Chad Lafarge from Columbia, Missouri says, Socket is finally bringing fiber to my house in May. Woo! What router do you suggest I get to protect my network on my dreamy soon-to-be connection?
John Pewitt.
So I'm going to talk to you about how we design networks at our office. We never put routers on the internet. We put a security firewall between the router and the internet. The reason why you'd want to do that is that it gives you more flexibility. It gives you a device that you can burn if you need to. It prevents your router from being saturated and gives all sorts of benefits like that. Looking around, I'm not a network specialist, so I'm making some recommendations based off of reviews. But the Ubiquiti Unify Security Gateway seems to be a highly rated device that you can put your router behind and have it conduct the internet connection and provide your firewall between your devices and the internet.
Yeah, I think that's what we use. All right, next question.
Stefan Würzburg from Würzburg, Stefan Fischer from Würzburg, Germany. Broadcasting situation. When connecting my MixPre 6 to my Blackmagic 6K via the Mini XLR, do I put the output level to line or get a good signal to the camera?
Alex?
Yeah, I would. You basically, once you go into a device, you want to be at line level when you go out of the device. Passing mic level around is the mic level is a very low voltage because that is the response of the microphone. But it is, because it's low voltage, it's much closer to the potential noise floor. So you definitely want to pump line through, which is going to increase the signal to noise ratio. So yeah, absolutely go to line. And the reality is, once you're coming out of a Mini, you can go into the XLR, but you can also go to the Mini input inside the 6K. If you have, I'm going to assume that if you're using the MixPre, that you're going to record a better solution on the MixPre, and the camera is just for scratch, which is what I would do.
All right, next question.
From David Guzmão in Brazil, Porto Alegre. What's your suggestion for drawing over a keynote presentation for streaming educational purpose?
John Pewitt.
I am going to recommend an iPad. I use pencil. I put Keynote on my iPad and I can draw here. Let me see if this works. Nope, that's the wrong one. There we go. Right input. Yeah. So I can just now take my pencil and circle stuff and draw around, and it works great.
Peter?
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing, whether it's Keynote. Actually, I just use the iPad period for that kind of stuff because, I know we like to use Keynote when we can, but sometimes works as I use PowerPoint. PowerPoint works exactly the same way. And it's really a function of the iPad sending a video signal out. Just make sure you're using a powered connection with the HDMI out of the iPad into your switcher, because it will burn power quickly otherwise.
Alex?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely, when you're doing a Keynote document, you always want to present, if you can, present Keynote from your iPad, because it does allow you to draw over those things. And so that's definitely a way to go. You can also use Keynote. Like I have this Telestrator, but you can do a lot of that inside of Keynote. You just can't see what you're doing in Keynote. And so what I do is, a lot of times when I'm trying to talk to a client, I may create a whole bunch of white slides that I just keep on just spinning to, and I can just draw on it. So it becomes a whiteboard that I can just draw on. And sometimes so that can be another way that you can use Keynote as a kind of a drawing board. It just lets you wipe to a new page as you're working.
All right, next question.
From Richard Lavery in Belfast, UK, turning on our Blackmagic 16 today, it went to a yellow screen in the on-device display, and the multi-view did not display. It did still pass signal. Any ideas on what is happening? Turning it off and on again twice got it working.
Alex?
And I'm assuming this is the Blackmagic multi-view, and we have found that occasionally that they get into a state when they stand up that has this happen. And what you did is exactly what we do. We turn it on and off again a couple of times, and then it comes on. I don't know what that cause is. I think it's some kind of network thing. So if it's on a network and getting network controls, we have seen that before, and we have done exactly what you're doing there to get it back. We find that once it's running, it doesn't do that, which is why we almost never turn it off. So with a lot of our base Blackmagic stuff, I'm afraid we don't turn them off, because they oftentimes come back up in ways that we don't want them to.
All right, next question.
It's Jason Panks from Nashville, Tennessee, asking a question for Apple's March 8th event. What's on your wish list to be announced?
Nigel?
Well, I guess there's a difference between what I wish for and what I think they're going to do. But what I'd really like is a new Mac Mini with probably an M1 Max in it. Now, what would I really like if I had a wish list? It would be with an M2 Max, but I think that may not going to happen. But I think a new Mac Mini, and I'd like to spend less than $2,000, because I can get some money back for my old Mac and still get that through my budget.
John Pewitt? Oh, we can't hear you.
Sorry. So I would like to see the M1 Max, but I also want to see a Mac Pro Max, because I know it's going to be an improvement to the Max. That's what I would really like to see.
Jeffrey?
Basically 6E can support, and being able to do Wi-Fi 6 at the 6 gigahertz level, because I think that'll be perfect. A lot of routers and everything like that you'll be able to transfer files a lot faster, and video will be even better within the Wi-Fi 6 gigahertz range.
Mitchell?
A new Mac Pro processor. And I'm saying to Apple, I hope they're listening, that if they put their newest on the drawing board processor in the Mac Pro, they can charge a premium for it, and then they can put it in the Mini.
Alex?
Yeah, I think we have to, if we're measuring it with what I think is probable, I think that, because I think the Mac Pro probably won't see until the fall, but if we had a wish list, absolutely get a Mac Pro. But I think that the Mac Mini is high on my list. I think that we're probably going to see an iPad of some sort, probably more educational focused. This tends to be the education keynote. So I think we'll see an iPad. I think we might see a higher level iMac, but that usually comes in WWDC. And I think the Mac Mini is the one that's the long in the tooth that doesn't have the processors that it needs. And so I think that the Mac's chip inside of a Mac Mini feels like it's 70, 80%. And that's what I'm waiting for, because I'm ready to buy 2 of them at any price under $2,000. So I really need those computers. And so I think I'm pretty excited about that. And then the only other thing from a software perspective is I still, every time I see a keynote now, especially the spring in the WWDC, I'm hoping that we see an update to the Office apps. So Pages and Keynote that would incorporate USDZ.
All right, next question.
Steve Uroff from Madison, Wisconsin. I've attached a MacBook Pro to an ATEM Mini via HDMI. When ATEM video is provided to Microsoft Teams or Zoom, the captured display is high contrast, lacking in gray levels. Is this a color space problem?
Mark.
Well, I'm doing that right now, and I threw a MacBook Pro, and it seems to be fine here.
Alex?
It is something we're trying to figure out. So going into Zoom, it seems a little punchy. Like, it's not a horrible view, but it does seem more contrasty than the original Signal. Here's the thing that's a little odd, is that it seems to be the driver in Zoom, or potentially the driver in Zoom, that's doing this, because when I open it in QuickTime, it looks fine. So QuickTime looks like the black levels are all there. The contrast is lower. And so it's not necessarily they're both using the exact same digital connection. It's not like I'm going HDMI out of the ATEM to do that. So I think that there could be some way that Zoom is managing that is doing it. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm starting to smell smoke. so and so I'm trying to figure that out.
All right, next question.
And this is a question from Stan Chan in Roseville. When will a new ATEM Constellation be released?
Alex?
Probably not anytime soon. So I think that, what you see is the 2 Mac Minis, are not the Mac Minis, ATEM Minis, and the ATEM Mini Extreme versions here, and then you see the Constellation over here. As far as cost and performance, there's this huge gap between the two of switchers that are all old. Like, they're all old in the tooth. They're missing all the things that the Constellation and even the Extreme have. I think it's much more likely that we're going to see updates in between the Extreme and the Constellation in the next, whatever schedule Blackmagic can muster. That's what we're going to probably see next.
All right, next question.
Kenneth Jones in Seattle, Washington. Short of Lloyd's of London, which is known to insure anything and everything if you want to pay for it, what insurers understand the risk of this industry? Are errors and omissions and general liability policies adequate choice?
Jeffrey.
It really depends on what you're talking about, where you're going from there. There's several different companies that will insure your tech, from everything down to your phone up to high-end technology. You buy stuff on Amazon, they'll give you a 2 to 3 year warranty through different Squarespace. No, I'm trying to remember the name of the main company that I've talked to several times. There's several different companies that will allow it, and of course, you can also put an umbrella from certain insurances, like homeowners and stuff like that, on your technology into these devices as well.
Alex?
Yeah, I mean, we carried a lot of insurance through the Hartford is what we actually used, and they have some folks that specialize in this type of equipment. I mean, to them, it's just math. It's just like, how much is it worth, and and they have actuaries that figure this all out. For us, I think we carried PixelCore, at least. I know is a little bit different, but PixelCore, I think we carried I think it was like $7 million of liability, $2 million of loss. And I think it was $5 million of errors and omissions. So those are the 3 things that we paid. And then there's obviously, workers' comp and all the other things that you have to do. But I think that the big thing there is that the loss is, your stuff dying. The liability is your stuff burning the house, burning the building down that you're going into. And the errors and omissions is you hit the wrong button, kind of thing. And so and oftentimes the errors and omission is something that you kind of decide how much you're willing to, shoulder as far as that goes. The losses, and the loss is also what you're willing to lose. That's mostly up to you. Liability is often defined as you start doing larger productions by the locations that you're working with. So, how we got to 7 million is, I'm sure that I think there was some conference center that required that. Like it was like, and so we just increased it, but it started at 1 million, 2 million, 5 million, and it just gets bigger. And what it does for a company is that it allows you get to take those jobs, because otherwise, if you don't have that liability insurance to go into that building, you're going to end up having to, go out to somebody else and have it. Now, you can do it on a show by show basis. So there's LA companies, especially, that will, do insurance by, a week or 2 weeks or the length of your project, and but you'll pay a lot more for that, on a one-off basis. It also makes you look small, like when you're doing it that way, and your vendors will know that, and entertainment vendors don't really care, because they know that you're trying to keep the whole budget contained into that. But when you're working with corporate clients, being able to say, oh yeah, we got that, and just sending it over, it creates confidence, because it means that you're working at a scale that most of the other operators can't. And you can very quickly just deliver liability insurance, because you're basically sending them a proof of insurance. It definitely changes the way the corporate clients work with you, and you become much easier to work with, because the other ones are going to take time, and they're going to have to fiddle with it, and there's going to be an extra charge, and that kind of thing. So,
all right, next question.
Hasmuk in South Africa. In trying to perfect the video and using 6K as a webcam, I have very different results on each of my 4 monitors and the prompter. Should I use the spider to color correct the monitor that comes with prompter people?
Alex?
Yeah, I wouldn't worry about the prompter as far as color correction goes. I mean, it's really useful. You can use the spider on everything, and it will get them all much closer together. I try to only have one monitor that I pay a lot of attention to, and say that's my one version of the truth, rather than using every monitor. But you can use the spider across those. The place that you have trouble with it is the spider only works on monitors that are connected to your computer. So there are some other tools that you can use. There's Blackmagic makes some inline monitor correction that you can actually put sensors on. So these are the 8K displays. They don't have to be 8K, but they're these displays. And so that now you have HDMI or SDI going into this little box, and then out of that box goes into the monitor. And that box has a little sensor plug in the front that you can actually plug into it. So now that box basically creates a LUT for your monitor, and you'll put that sensor on it, much like the spider. This is just a much more expensive version of your spider, if you actually want to correct those that way. So it just depends on what you're trying to do. Usually I only worry about one monitor, and usually I'll stream it and compare it to my phone, because the Apple phone is probably the most accurate monitor you're going to have under $5,000.
All right, and for our last question today in the first hour, let's go to that, Mitchell.
Richard Lavery from Belfast, UK. Our older Panasonic projector won't accept the signal from our decimator. Any ideas to troubleshooting?
Mitchell.
Well, it's good to have a decimator, because it should also show what the frame rate is. And I suspect that you might be throwing a frame rate higher than the projector can handle. But I may be wrong. But the decimator is a good place to start.
All right, and Nigel?
Completely unhelpful suggestion for anybody who wants to spend too much money. Have a look at the JVC DLA NZ9, because that's what you should be putting in your home theaters today.
All right, Alex.
Go ahead. I'm thinking I'm going to have to buy one right now. I think it could be a frame rate issue. It also could be a resolution issue. The older Panasonic isn't going to be able to see probably anything in your country. An older Panasonic probably won't be able to see anything other than 25. And so just make sure that it's 25. You may already do that, but that's the only thing I can think of, other than getting like an HDMI to DVI converter, if that's what it's doing. Sometimes it might not like the flavor of HDMI that it's getting.
All right, so that wraps up our first hour today. We will be going over to Zoom for our education hour, so you can say goodbye to YouTube. If you'd like to join us, make sure you come on into that Zoom meeting, and I will reopen the questions for our educators. Raise your hands as well to come in, and we'll just say bye, everyone. See you next week.
And for our educators, the